Cassandra Hill hadn't been seen in public for months, not as herself. The woman the world saw on magazine covers and real estate contracts no longer matched the one who now walked in silence down a brick path, her coat worn thin at the edges, her shoes whispering stories of a life she never forgot. This wasn't nostalgia. This was a test. She stepped into Maison Hill just after the lunch rush, when the aroma of roasted garlic and truffle butter still lingered in the air. Her restaurant, her vision. But no one recognized her. Not the hostess, not the bartender, and certainly not the waiter who met her eyes with disdain before even speaking a word. Her name wasn't on his lips, nor was it in his memory. She had chosen this deliberately. No makeup, no designer label. Just a scarf pulled tightly over her natural hair and an old handbag that once belonged to her mother. She hadn't come to be served. She had come to be seen, not as a brand, not as a businesswoman, but as a black, single mother who once sat in the back of restaurants hoping someone would take her seriously. She didn't expect a red carpet, but she didn't expect humiliation either. The waiter barely concealed his contempt. He glanced at her coat, then at the tables, and muttered something about being at capacity, though half the restaurant was visibly empty. He didn't ask if she'd like to wait. He didn't offer water. He didn't even suggest takeout. He dismissed her like she had interrupted something important. A ripple of quiet disbelief spread through her. But she gave. No outward sign. She simply nodded and turned around, leaving the same way she entered, with calm dignity masking a storm. Outside, the sky was darkening. Charleston's cobbled streets echoed under her slow steps. But Cassandra didn't head home. She circled the block, pulled out her phone, and contacted her silent legal team. Then she entered the staff door quietly, with the access code she'd had since the building was first remodeled. No one stopped her. No one dared. Inside the office, she reviewed recent hiring documents. She had delegated more than usual lately, trusting her new management to uphold the values she built the restaurant on: humility, grace, dignity, but delegation had bred distance, and now that distance had shown its teeth. The waiter's name was Dylan Crawford. Hired just 2 weeks. Ego without final approval, slipping through an HR shortcut during Cassandra's recent silent retreat. His resume boasted fine dining experience, but no one seemed to check how he treated the invisible guests. She pulled the surveillance footage from 10 minutes earlier. There she was, standing near the entrance, ignored like background noise. Cassandra felt no anger, only clarity. This wasn't about being recognized. It was about seeing who would be treated with honor when no one was watching. She sat in the corner of the empty office, letting the weight of the moment sink in. She thought about the nights she fed her son instant noodles in their car after fleeing a violent ex. She thought of the time a restaurant denied her a job because she looked tired. And she thought of the long nights she spent drafting. The Maison Hill vision by candlelight because the power had been cut off again. She didn't build this empire to become untouchable. She built it so others could believe again, in themselves, in second chances, in being seen. Later that evening, she returned, not dressed down, not in disguise. She wore a fitted charcoal blazer, natural curls cascading over her shoulders, and heels that tapped confidence into every corner of the building. She didn't need a name tag. Every sous chef who caught a glimpse of her posture, every line cook who remembered her hand in training, stood straighter. She walked past the kitchen into the dining hall. Dylan didn't recognize her, not until the general manager rushed forward, and nearly tripped in his apology. Even then, Dylan stood frozen. It took him a full 5 seconds to realize the woman he had denied was the owner, the visionary, the soul behind the entire place. Cassandra didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult. She simply looked around the room. Then she asked the general manager to call a full staff meeting for the next morning. Attendance would be mandatory. That night, she left quietly. She returned home, removed her earrings, and sat by her kitchen window with a notepad. On it, she wrote a single line. "Who is this space for, if not the forgotten?" In the morning, she arrived before anyone else. She stood at the center of the dining hall, the tables bare, the silverware polished, the chandeliers catching dawn's first light. When the staff gathered, she told them the story. Not of the waiter, but of the woman she once was. A single mother denied dignity, a dreamer who wasn't welcomed, a builder who learned how to serve because no one had ever served her. There were no tears, just stillness. Dylan stood at the edge of the group, jaw clenched, realizing he had not only insulted a guest, but the very purpose of the house he worked in. At the end of her story, Cassandra handed out letters. One to Dylan, termination, effective immediately. Another to the general manager, a warning. And one more, to the entire team, inviting them to remember why they chose this place in the first place. Outside, the sun rose higher. The city moved on. But inside Maison Hill, something shifted forever. The woman they turned away had reclaimed her table, not out of vengeance, but to make sure no one else would ever be made to feel like they didn't belong. It rained the morning. After the staff meeting, not a violent storm, but the kind of soft, weeping drizzle that made the pavement shimmer and the air smell like truth. Cassandra watched it from her office window upstairs, the very room where she once signed her first loan application with trembling hands. She didn't mind the rain. She had known storms far worse, both inside and out. Downstairs, the atmosphere had changed. The same hands that plated duck confit the day before now moved slower, more deliberately. Staff whispered instead of laughed. They had felt the weight of her story. And though Cassandra never wanted pity, she knew the silence meant something had shifted. Maison Hill had always stood for more than food. It was built on memories, on intention. The first recipes came from a notebook passed down by her grandmother, a woman who fed 10 children on scraps but seasoned with faith. Every dish had roots, every flavor a history. But somewhere in the smooth operations and award nominations, the soul had dimmed. That soul had to be reignited, not by press releases or firings, but by presence. Cassandra began showing up more often, not as the CEO, but as the memory keeper. She sat with the dishwashers during breaks, helped prep herbs in the kitchen, took mental notes of who smiled and who merely performed. Her presence didn't demand fear. It required honesty. She paid close attention to the guests, especially the ones the world overlooked. A single father with 2 toddlers sharing one entree, an elderly woman who lingered after her coffee, perhaps just to feel less alone, a young man who ate with a worn backpack at his feet and kept checking his phone, hoping for a message that never came. These were the people Maison Hill was for. Then came the quiet idea. Cassandra had never liked charity that felt performative. She didn't want photo ops or fundraisers that turned the poor into projects. So she created a new internal policy, Table 12. Every night, one table, always Table 12, would be reserved anonymously for someone chosen by staff. No announcement, no promotion. It might be a janitor who smiled through pain, or a school bus driver who hadn't had a proper meal in months. The meal would be fully covered by the house. The only requirement? They be treated with the same dignity as a senator. The first night it launched, the staff chose a quiet woman who worked the night shift at the hospital nearby. She walked in, unsure why she'd been invited, confused when the head chef greeted her by name. But as the courses came, each dish warm, each bite thoughtful, her eyes welled with something that hadn't visited her in years: respect. Word of Table 12 never made headlines. That was the point. But within the walls of Maison Hill, it became sacred. Cassandra's vision extended beyond one gesture. She began rewriting staff training manuals, not just on etiquette, but on humanity. Every new hire would learn not just the menu, but the meaning behind each dish. They'd read letters from customers who had found healing in a bowl of soup or courage in a slice of warm, spiced pie. She also began anonymously funding culinary scholarships for single mothers across the South, women who, like her, had once chosen between diapers and dinner. The only thing she asked in return was that they remember what it felt like to be invisible, and then promise never to make anyone else feel that way again. One Friday, Cassandra returned to the restaurant during dinner rush, not to inspect, but to dine. She wore simple gold earrings, a long green coat, and a pair of leather flats that were already soft with wear. She didn't call ahead. She simply walked in, waited patiently at the front desk, and asked if table 12 was free. It was. The hostess, a young black woman named Jada who had joined after the Dylan incident, smiled with genuine warmth and led her there. Cassandra watched the dining room from her corner. She saw couples celebrating anniversaries, a group of women, laughing over cocktails, and a delivery driver in the back corner devouring his meal like it was the first food of the day. She ordered what her grandmother used to make: collard greens, slow-cooked oxtail, and sweet cornbread with honey glaze. The taste took her back, not to luxury, but to life, to struggle, to meaning. After dinner, she left no tip, just a handwritten note tucked under her napkin. This food saved me once. Tonight, it saved me again. Later that night, as the servers cleared the table, they found the note. Jada recognized the handwriting. She didn't tell anyone. She just folded the paper carefully, as if it were scripture, and placed it inside her apron. The staff whispered less now. They moved with more reverence. Not from fear, but because they were finally beginning to understand what Maison Hill was always meant to be. It wasn't about fine dining. It wasn't about trend. It was about recognition, of struggle, of worth, of stories left untold, and as the rain continued to fall outside, soft, steady, cleansing, Cassandra knew the house was healing, not just for her, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. The whispers had started before the city even noticed. It wasn't on the radio. It wasn't trending on social media. But it moved like gospel through hair salons, laundromats, church basements, and bus stops. There's a place in Charleston where they feed you like family, and it don't matter what you wear. Maison Hill had stopped being a restaurant. It had become a movement. The reservations doubled within 2 weeks, not just because of the food, which had always been sublime, but because people were drawn to what it represented. Word had gotten out about the anonymous table. Rumors swirled that a woman came every so often and paid for strangers' meals without being seen. They didn't know her name. Some called her a silent angel. Others called her a quiet queen. Cassandra let the mystery breathe. She didn't need to be known. She needed the message to live without her name attached, because this wasn't about her anymore. It was about dignity, shared like bread. Her quiet initiatives continued to bloom in secret. Maison Hill began sourcing produce from local women-led farms, paying above market rate. They partnered with small bakeries run by formerly incarcerated mothers, giving them purpose and partnership. Even the cleaning crew now included those the world often ignored: immigrants, the elderly, the differently abled, each one hand-selected. Not for pity, but for potential. But with that growth came pressure. One Thursday afternoon, Cassandra met with her board of investors on the rooftop patio above the restaurant. They were suited men and women, successful in every way society measured: wealth, influence, leverage. They had come not to celebrate, but to question. "The comps are getting excessive," one said. "Your margins are thinning," another added. "We're becoming more of a mission than a business," one muttered, not realizing Cassandra was listening more closely to that than all else. She didn't interrupt. She let them speak. She let the spreadsheets flash across the projector. showing dips where dips shouldn't be and rising expenses where accountants feared. Then she stood up and walked to the edge of the balcony. Below, the restaurant buzzed with motion. Laughter, clinking glasses, napkins folded just right. "Do you know who's eating downstairs right now?" she asked quietly. They didn't answer. A high school janitor celebrating his first retirement check. A grandmother with her autistic grandson who won't eat anywhere else. A cancer survivor celebrating her last round of chemo. And at table 12, a young man who just lost both parents in a car crash, brought in by a neighbor who didn't want him to grieve alone. The board was silent now. "We're not losing profit," Cassandra continued. "We're investing it. In people, in moments, in stories that deserve to be honored." One of the newer investors leaned forward. "But where's the ceiling, Cassandra? Where's the limit to this generosity?" She turned to face them fully, eyes calm but fierce. "There is no ceiling on compassion, and if there ever is, then this roof isn't worth standing under." She didn't wait for their approval. She thanked them for their time, walked away from the meeting, and called her head chef to double the Table 12 budget for the next month. That weekend, something unexpected happened. An anonymous article appeared in the Charleston Chronicle, written by a food critic who had dined at Maison Hill in disguise. The piece didn't review the food. It reviewed the experience, the warmth, the way a server paused to make sure an elderly man's tea had the exact right temperature, the way the coat checker offered silent affirmations to a nervous young couple on their first date, the way every meal seemed wrapped in intention. The headline read, "The Restaurant That Feeds the Soul and the City." By Monday, the wait list stretched over 6 weeks. But that didn't bother Cassandra, because walk-ins were still allowed, and every night Table 12 still welcomed someone who had no reservation, no plan, just a heart in need of something more than food. That week, a retired bus driver was seated at that table. He hadn't told anyone it was his birthday. But the kitchen somehow knew. They sent out a small cake, cinnamon cream and caramel drizzle, made just for him. He cried when he saw it, not because it was sweet, but because someone had remembered him without ever asking his name. Meanwhile, Cassandra continued to move in shadows. She visited shelters at night, learning names and faces. She bought uniforms for single mothers hoping to start catering businesses. She gave seed loans through anonymous channels requiring only one thing in return, that kindness be passed forward in any way they could. One night, she returned home to find a letter slid under her apartment door. No name, no return address, just these words: "I was Table 12, I was broken, I left whole. Thank you." She held the letter to her chest and exhaled, not from relief, but from remembrance. Maison Hill had become more than a restaurant. It had become a sanctuary. A temple built not of stone, but of intention. A place where healing was plated with care and redemption simmered slowly in every pot. And as the world outside continued its hurried pace, busy, loud, dismissive, inside this house of memory, strangers became guests, guests became family, and one woman's silence fed 1,000 unseen mouths. The seasons shifted. Winter crept into Charleston with its soft, biting winds and bare trees. Maison Hill remained warm inside, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. Fireplaces cracked in quiet corners, candles glowed on every table, and casseroles rich with heritage warmed hands and hearts. But in the calm, Cassandra Hill knew something deeper. True legacy begins when you're no longer the one holding the light. One morning, Cassandra woke early, earlier than usual. She felt something tugging at her spirit, not in fear, but in knowing. She brewed her tea, dressed in a loose turtleneck and wool pants, and walked the streets in silence. Charleston's air was thick with memory that day. She passed the bus stop where she used to wait with her son, both of them hungry, both of them pretending they weren't. She passed the building where she'd once been denied a loan, simply. because she didn't look like the type to manage money. Everything she had built now stood as a rebuke to every closed door. But she hadn't done it for vengeance. She'd done it so no one else would feel as erased as she once had. That afternoon, she gathered her core staff, Chef Renee, Jada the hostess, her silent kitchen porter Malik, and a few others, and led them into the back office. She didn't sit. She didn't offer pleasantries. She just handed out letters one by one. Not of termination, but of ownership. She was giving away shares of the restaurant, not just as a gesture, but as a transition. Cassandra had quietly decided to step back, not to disappear, but to let the house run without her shadow darkening every corner. It had grown beyond her, and that was the point. She wasn't dying. She wasn't leaving Charleston, but she wanted Maison Hill to belong to those who had fed its roots, not just with hands, but with heart. At first, the staff were stunned. Chef Renee shook her head, holding the share certificate like it was made of glass. Malik simply nodded, tears pooling in his eyes but not falling. Jada whispered a thank you that barely made it out of her mouth. Cassandra stood in the center and said only one thing. "If I disappear tomorrow, the love must stay. That's your job now." And then she left them with it. Not orders, not instructions, just the responsibility to remember. That evening, Maison Hill filled up once again, just as it had every night for months. The dining room shimmered in candlelight, and the scent of rosemary chicken and honey butter rolls wafted through the air. Cassandra entered one final time, not to inspect, not to correct, but to witness. At table 12 sat a teenage girl and her father. Their clothes were modest. The father's face carried exhaustion. The girl smiled nervously as she sipped her drink. Cassandra could tell this was special for them. She watched as Renee herself brought out the meal. 2 plates, beautifully garnished, more than they could have ever expected. The girl's eyes widened. The father's shoulders softened. That's when Cassandra knew. The house was in good hands. She walked past the tables quietly. No one recognized her. The new waiter, one she hadn't met yet, offered her a menu with the kind of smile that made her pause. She accepted the seat. She dined as a guest, and this time no one turned her away. Not for how she looked, not for what she wore, and certainly not for who she used to be. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, every texture that carried. Generations of struggle, joy, and story. And when the dessert came, peach cobbler with cardamom and fresh cream, she closed her eyes, remembering her mother's hands, her grandmother's laugh, her son's tiny fingers once curled around a spoon. She paid in full, left another handwritten note, and stood to leave. But before she did, she turned to look at the glowing chandelier, the tables filled with people of every background, the soft buzz of connection, the deep thrum of purpose still humming beneath, the floorboards. Maison Hill no longer needed Cassandra Hill, because its heart was now etched into every staff member who stayed late to wipe down chairs with care. Every cook who double-checked a guest's dietary need not because they had to, but because they wanted to get it right. Every manager who now understood that dignity wasn't an add-on, but the main ingredient. Months later, stories continued to grow. People came not just for the food, but for the feeling. Awards arrived, journalists called, celebrity chefs tried to model their kitchens after it, but none could replicate what Maison Hill had found, because what it served was intangible. It served belonging, and at the core of it all was a story of one black single mother, once turned away from a table in her own house, who chose not revenge, but revival. She didn't become the face of a movement. She became the seed, and the house fed generations long after her footsteps faded from its halls.